All right, folks, step 2 is building your security team. And what we're going to talk about under that is organizational structure, the vetting of team members, the use of law enforcement, and how many team members do you need. Now, before I jump into any of that, I wanted to talk about what you may find when you start building a security team is somebody's going to step forward with their chest out and their resume in their hand, and they're going to describe to you exactly how awesome they are at shooting and all their plans. And a lot of times that's the worst person to have on your security team member, and you definitely don't want them leading it. Sometimes it pays off. I've just seen it enough that I recognize this person who's contentious, wants to be big man in charge, can oftentimes be a cancer to a team environment. So make sure you don't just immediately take the first vocal person and put them in a position of leadership. There we go. Now, let's jump in first and talk with law enforcement, because this is one of the quickest, easiest ways to establish yourself as a hard target in the eyes of an active killer. Active killers don't want a fair fight. They want to walk in and kill a bunch of kids in an elementary school because they're cowards. They want to pick an environment where people are nice, kind, accommodating, and less likely to turn their faces into canoes, right? And so what we want to do is prevent them from ever picking you as a target. And nothing says find a different place quite as well as a cop car parked outside your church on Sunday mornings and a cop in uniform, gun on hip, in your foyer as soon as they walk in. So that can be really, really good. Yes, that costs a little bit. I'd advise you to go ahead and suck it up and try to make allowance for that. If you were doing nothing else, just that one thing, a one-man security team, that might be fantastic. A cop's going to have arrest authority, whereas your security team members, a lot of times if they put hands on someone physically, when it wasn't some felonious reaction, somebody was committing a felony, but your security team member put hands on somebody, now your church is opened up to a really bad lawsuit, whereas a cop has arrest authority. A cop provides very, very strong disincentivization for a bad guy to attack your place in the first place. And so for a nominal fee, for a little select window on Sunday mornings. Now, some of you guys will immediately think, it just looks too aggressive, it's going to scare our congregation members. And I'd counter back with, no, I don't think it's going to. I don't think it's going to. People watch enough news, they're already concerned about this. Everyone's thinking about this already. And to see a cop car out front means, they won't get us. And everyone gets that. And it's not so bad to have a cop who may not have been at church, and now they're at church. So your congregation size just went up by 1. So good job. Yeah, you paid for it, but you got it. Dumb joke. Next thing to talk about is number of team members. Now, if you're a small church, you can get away with a 3-4-man element if you're really small. But recognize as well, if you're using those same dudes or gals on a Sunday morning, and if you got multiple services, now they don't really get to attend church, and then they do that every single weekend, and now you're going to, you fill the positions, and you feel safe, but 3 months in, everyone's burnt out, and people just stop showing up. So you need a much bigger team than what's actually being used on Sunday morning. So, if you have a 4-man element that's required to secure your church as best you can with what you got, really that's 16 if you're rotating them out so people don't get burned out. Because remember, with any of these teams, you're running a marathon, not doing a sprint, right? If pastor's preaching 3 sermons every day for 5 years, he's just going to burn out, right? He can't teach that much. So anyway, I'll take a sabbatical for 2 years. You can't do that. Don't burn out your team members. So you need a pretty big team, right? All right, so let's talk about vetting of team members. First and foremost, let's make sure we're doing background checks on everyone. And you don't apologize for that. Just say, hey, sorry, this is our policy. Blame the policy. And say, hey, I'm sure you're clear, but we have to do this. It's our policy. So run a background check on everybody that's serving in any security context. And that's just good wisdom in general for anyone that's trying to serve on staff. You don't want a scandal, right? Second thing is I want to look at the character requirements and then also professional requirements. So let's jump into the character requirements first. First and foremost for me, I care a lot more about somebody being of good character than I have them being some ninja, assassin, tactical warrior, commando. If that language disturbs you, I'm just trying to be hilarious. I usually don't pull it off because I've got a dad joke-ish sense of humor, but bear with me. So really it's the above reproach element. people like them, people look up to them, so that if they see them serving the church, they're representing the church, make sure that they don't look badly upon you. Next is I'm looking for kind of a person of peace in the James 1:19 sense of quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. That's gold for a security team. You want a person of peace. They're not looking for a fight. They're not creeping everyone out with their earpiece and their 1,000-yard stare. Some folks will really, really like that. They want the attention of to look dangerous. I'm like, yeah, I'm bad. I'm on security. I'm like, dude, you're dorking this up for us. I like my security team members to be mistaken for greeters. They're not greeters. They're not in that capacity. They're not engaging and glad handing on Sunday mornings. They're sitting back, they're smiles, but really their idea is to look for threats. They're smiling on the outside, and then they're imagining all kinds of different scenarios of all the different ways that violence could befall their church. So they need to be able to pay attention to backpacks entering, bulges in jackets, demeanor hits when people come in and see somebody in a security capacity. That's what they're looking for. All the different threat indicators and reading of the criminal psychology elements, which they should be schooled in, that's what they're occupied with. So let them work. But I don't want anybody really knowing. And it's not like I'm trying to build some hush-hush, like, don't let anyone know you're on security kind of thing. That's not it. If you were looking for security at your church, you'd be able to see it and find it. If you weren't looking for church security, you could just attend the service and not really realize it was there. People will know that you have church security, and that's not a total bad thing. You just don't want it to be a distraction. Humility is the next big piece. You're not looking for people who are seeking to validate themselves or be the big man. It is a subservient role. It's kind of a role in the shadows. It's a thankless job in a lot of respects. You don't get to sit with your family oftentimes. You miss the service so that you have to attend another service to be able to get fed. And so having the humility to be able to take orders, serve in a capacity, that's tough. And that leads into sacrificial servants as well, recognizing that they're serving joyfully unto the Lord in a Colossians 3 type context, right? So I've seen too many people excited to participate in church security, and then they end up kind of falling off because it's a lot of hard work and it's a little bit thankless. And then loving protectors. They see their service as a God-assigned gifting. That's how they are built, as protectors, and they want to be able to serve God and the congregation in general silently in the shadows in that capacity. It's a good, holy thing to do. So we dealt with character expectations. Let's now deal with professional expectations. One is they're committed. That means they don't join the security team, so they get that kind of little check mark on their belt, and then they're just never really available. So you'll want to set in your SOPs, that's your standard operating procedures of the church, a basic guideline that says, hey, if you're on the security team, you got to serve at least one Sunday a month in both services, or whatever you decide based on how many members that you have. Maybe you're like every other week or 2 Sundays a month. Whatever you decide with, they need to be committed. This also means they show up early so that they can do security sweeps if applicable to their position, and they can get all on the same page, that they're team players in that respect, but they need to be committed, and that's under the professional expectations of serving on a church security team. Next is vigilant. Now, just as we had said before, they're smiling, their heads are up, they're alert, they're not like playing on their phones or anything, they're situationally aware, and on the surface they just look like pleasant people blending into the congregation. And under the surface, they're imagining all kinds of different scenarios playing out. In vigilant, that if they're in the service, they're not really participating like everyone else is. You may hear some stuff, but your primary role, if you're in a security capacity, is you're watching, you are serving. So everyone bows heads to pray, and you bow head, but your eyes don't close. You're still looking. If I was going to attack someone in a congregation, what better time but when everybody closes their eyes and bows their head? That's prime attack time, in my opinion. So anyway, having their heads up, they're not coming and answering altar calls. They're watching everyone else, right? They're the sheepdog so that all the sheep may graze, right? And it's the sheepdog's protection that allows that to happen. I said sheepdog, I should say shepherd, because that's the biblical thing. And you know what? We take the word shepherd as a metaphorical sense, as we should, as the Bible uses it in a metaphorical sense of loving and serving, the sheep in general. But before it was a metaphor, it was a physical application of you had your rod, your staff, to be able to beat down wolves and protect the sheep. So let's not forget that it wasn't always a metaphor. It was picked as a metaphor because it was a physical thing as well. So anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it was good. So their professional expectations of team members: one, they're committed, they're vigilant, and also let's have them highly trained. That's why we picked them as security team members in the first place. And what we want is we want to have our cake and eat it too. That means people of good character, persons of peace, team players, good character, loving God, loving people, but they're also, you picked them for security team members because if all of a sudden they had to throw a switch and answer violence with greater violence, they would be able to accomplish that. So yeah, they're sweet until it's not time to be so sweet anymore, right? These are folks that are able to shoot people, fight people. They're folks that in a fight, you would want that person there. So you want them highly trained. This could be people that are very proficient at martial arts. If they were a martial arts person, but not necessarily a gun person, I would want them to hang real close to pastor. That'll be the pastoral protection guard, the PPG as we'll call them later, because it's a hands-on type skill. Typically, you won't have time to access any weapon if somebody's launching an attack on a pastor because the reactionary gap, their distance, and the time they have to react is very small, which means they'll have to go hands-on. So I know I'm getting a bit technical, but I'm just saying there's lots of different skills that we want to look at. Other people are going to be real geared into kind of the technology aspect of protection. They may be a little bit nerdy and not quite the good physique, and they've never even shot a gun, but they understand access control. They understand security cameras and all the technology and cybersecurity stuff. That is awesome, and that has a place as well. So as looking at security team members for their professional expectations, that's a real big deal too. A security team, I want a good medic on the security team, and maybe that's not in sense of the physical protection, but to be able to pull those two in together because they're kind of a married relationship, I'd want them there as well. So for highly trained, what they ideally, as you're vetting them, they have a background check. They sign like a code of ethics that you would create for their character expectations. And then they give you a tactical resume. So background check, code of ethics, now some type of tactical resume. You're not going to just take their word for it. But if they say that they've got a skill, you'll want to test that later, but it's just part of our vetting process, right? If they're former military or former law enforcement, that can be helpful as well. So you'll want to be able to identify that. All right, so far in step 2, we've talked about vetting of your team members, and that's one, checking out, whether we should include law enforcement in, professional qualifications, character qualifications, and the final part of step 2 is to talk about organizational structure. Now, some people, some pastors, some leadership will think about the security team as some type of different entity that doesn't need to be shepherded the same way as all the other teams do, and that's wrong. You don't want to do that. What you'll find is your security team just after a few months starts to fizzle out and fall apart, and you didn't understand why. And a lot of times it's dying of neglect. Just like you have your hospitality team and your worship team and all of your other teams, this one also needs the same type of encouragement, organizing, and prayer, shepherding as all the other teams do. It's absolutely no different in that respect. So what you'll want in your organizational structure, and I don't know how your ecclesiology works, but maybe put somebody who's a little bit more into the security thing. Maybe it's an executive pastor who's over the top. Then they appoint a security director who's something like a deacon. And then under the security director, you'll have a bunch of team leaders and maybe a training director and your communications director, whatever you want to put under that. But you'll want a security director who's under the shepherding of someone like an associate pastor or an executive pastor, something like that, right? What they're typically doing is they're coming together for prayer. They're hanging out on weekends from time to time, or participating in competition shooting events, barbecues, doing cool stuff together as a team. They'll also rally together on Sunday mornings for quick meetings where they get on the same page, quick prayer, and get out. Go to your different security positions, and we'll connect after the service. So you want a team that's built like this, not a bunch of individual commandos that are all playing zone around the church. Got it? All right, guys, this is step 2. Let's move on to step 3.